Advice Show. You're tuning into another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. We got a great show for you today. We're tuning into an older conversation with my good friend, Kristin Sherry. If you don't know Kristin, she is an international best-selling author. In fact, she quit her corporate gig several years ago and actually launched a little thing called YouMap. It's a personality test that I'm a big fan of. There's a lot more to say about it, but on top of that, she began writing books, and like I mentioned, she is internationally well-known. In fact, she is placed on a multitude of best-selling lists. She is absolutely way beyond my circle of influence, so I did not deserve to have a conversation with her for over an hour. However, we've continued to have conversations since this original one. I do apologize for the audio quality a little bit. We were on a Zoom call, and this was a bit of a time ago before I had a little bit of a better equipment set up. All that to say, now that I've drawn your attention to things you probably didn't even care about, let's tune in to this episode. But first, a word from one of the amazing businesses we love to chat about. See you soon. Have you ever put out some content or run a new advertising campaign or tried to launch a service that you just knew had magic to it, and then you were shocked to find out that no one seemed that interested in it? Maybe even felt downright depressed, thinking, what is going on? Did I mistype something? Did something go wrong here? There has to be a reason why people aren't latching onto this. You know, those moments where you have lightning in a bottle, and yet it seems like people just aren't getting it. Well, you might need to hire a marketing company that can help you take your business to the next level. I want to tell you about Excelity Marketing. They're the marketing company that B2B SaaS companies can count on, and they help them grow faster with bold sales and marketing processes that actually work. See, it's not about creating content and then praying that please let me have a sale today. It's about trusting a business that's actually different because they have over 10 years of hands-on experience working with B2B companies. And remember, it's the outcomes that count. The results speak for themselves. That's why I trust Excelity Marketing. Go to excelitymarketing.com to find out more. We have Kristin Sherry. She is a career consultant. She's the creator of YouMap, and she is a best-selling author. Guys, her books are phenomenal. She was just #1 in the career section on Amazon, and we are very excited to have her on the show today. Kristin, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Blake. I feel like this has been a long time coming from our first conversation on LinkedIn. I'm so excited to be talking with you today.
Well, I'm very excited as well, and it's partly a long time coming because I totally missed our last appointment.
Stop. Don't tattle on yourself.
Well, something that people who know me know about me is I'm very authentic. I try to be very honest, and so I say that not just to down myself, but to also, that's really why it's taken so long, is because I can't get my scheduling happening here. But super excited that you're on the show today, and I just there's so many different angles I want to go with our conversation. But I think the first thing, and for our listeners, when I first called Kristin, the thing that I loved about her was typically I offer to give the questions to the person who I'm going to have on the show. And Kristin said, nope, I don't want the questions. I just want to be as authentic as possible. Talk to me a little bit about that, because it's pretty impressive that that's your philosophy on these kinds of conversations.
Well, I mean, I've done a lot of, radio interviews and podcasts, and I know myself. I know that I will add the most value to your listener if I speak from my heart, and I don't want my head to get in the way. So that's why I don't like to know the questions, because I want to just go with what my heart tells me to say.
I love that. And I've been on this authenticity kick. It's one of the main things that I like to talk about with my following. And it's obviously something that you really value yourself. I'm curious, especially because you're on LinkedIn a lot, you're in the social media world. So you see people who no doubt they're presenting a certain form of themselves. I'd be curious to get your perspective on why does it feel like authenticity can be a challenge for some people?
Well, I think ultimately, if you look at the basic need that human beings have, it's to belong. And I think that people feel that if they are who they are and they say what they really think, and that maybe they might get rejected, or people won't like them, or will criticize them or think less of them. And so our self-conscious behavior gets in the way of presenting authentically sometimes. And I think that people who tend to be the most authentic are the people who have been through a lot of struggles and challenges and have learned that by opening up and being honest, that's when they had the best response from people. Authenticity pays off. And people who haven't put themselves out there yet, they haven't experienced that.
Or maybe they tried a little bit and they got burned in some way, or it didn't.
Possibly, but then they're not speaking to the right communication partner.
That's a good point. So what do you mean by that?
So Lila Smith is a really good friend of mine, and she is the creator of the Say Things Better method of intentional communication. And she reminds people that we all have a communication partner. That's the person that we are trying to reach with our authentic message, that wants to be the receiver of that message. And those are the people that we should be intentionally targeting with our messaging. And other people who don't relate to what we have to say or don't believe in our message, that's okay, because they have different communication partners. So we don't have to try to appeal to everyone. And so when people come up against you, if they're what we call trolling you or criticizing you or telling you, your content stinks or whatever they're doing, you don't look and say, what should I do differently? You say, that person's not my communication partner, and that's okay.
Well, and what a mature response, other than just like, I feel like when I get like those really harsh messages, I want to just like cry into my pillow. But I love how you said it, of like, oh yeah, they're just not my communication partner.
I'm like Teflon woman. It's what upsets me is when people attack people I care about, but people saying stuff about me or my content. Like, I know that my content helps people, not everyone, but it does help people. I've had messages of people saying this was really helpful to me, or I'm looking at this in a new way, or this was thought-provoking, or I went and did the tip and here's what happened. And so I'm not going to tweak what I'm doing or change what I'm doing for one person or two people when the majority of people are benefiting from what I'm doing. So you can't try to please everyone, because if you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one, really.
Well, and I love your philosophy too, because it's so true in business, in that a lot of times people, especially like in the marketing world, they'll try to revise their message for that one who didn't like it, rather than, and I've seen on your LinkedIn, you have so many pictures you post of people who've used, and we'll talk about YouMap here in a little bit, the people who've used it, who've like gotten their job, or they got their dream job, or just it's really cool seeing those things happen, and how crazy it would be for you to get one toxic message and then just flip the whole thing and say, well, I'm going to change everything.
It's actually really funny, because I do these job seeker workshops for people in the community who are unemployed, underemployed, or misemployed. And that's part of my volunteer work. That's not part of my job. I serve on a board of directors for Crossroads Career, and they help people with finding jobs. So I love this so much, I do it everywhere, but that's my volunteer work. And in these quarterly workshops, we survey the participants and we ask them certain things. It never fails. One person will say the room was too hot, and another person in the same session will say the room was too cold. So I always remember that survey, the room's too hot, the room's too cold, anytime people criticize my content. I do listen to what people are saying. I want to have an open heart to feedback for people who, even if their delivery is not tactful or is not the best method of delivery, what is the value in this feedback? Eat the meat and spit out the bones. So you should always be open and not just write everyone off as a troll. Maybe there's something valuable in their feedback, but they just have a little bit of a rough delivery.
So I have to pause for a second. I have to ask you where you got that expression, eat the meat and spit out the bones.
So I don't know where its origin is, but I heard it from Michelle Chapin. So Michelle Chapin is Chris Chapin's wife. Chris Chapin is a YouMap certified coach. Okay. And his wife said that to me once.
Okay. I use that expression because I heard it as a kid at a summer camp, probably 20 years ago. And I used it because I got it from there. And someone was like, where did that even come from? And then you're the first person I've actually heard say it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I really do like this person, because
it's a great saying, because there's so much value.
It is. And I love your philosophy on feedback, in that absolutely, taking criticism to heart in the sense of, okay, how can I be better? How can I improve? But also understanding where the line is, where, okay, that person isn't my i.e. target customer, or it's not someone who's in sync. And especially, doing like public speaking, when you stand up, there's people who are going to be like, oh my gosh, you're phenomenal. And there's gonna be people in the room who are like, you're an idiot. Who got this person here today? And focusing on the ones who really are getting the most out of it. I think that's a really great philosophy, rather than let's change the whole message. Let's turn it upside down.
Well, the second piece of feedback I would give around anyone who's putting themselves out there, because you're going to get criticized. I mean, I've had people tell me one of my posts was the most inane thing they've ever read. I mean, I'm sure that's not true, but we go into fight, flight, freeze when we are criticized, and an intellectual threat has the exact same brain response. If you look at an MRI, has the exact same brain response as a physical threat. So if you're being chased by a bear, or someone saying you're terrible and you suck, you have that same physiological reaction. And so what's really key is being mindful of your physiological reaction to threat. So when someone says something critical of you, staying calm, taking a deep breath, making sure your brain is staying oxygenated, because the blood flows away from your brain when you feel threatened, and then you start saying something stupid in response because your prefrontal cortex doesn't have enough oxygen to be rational.
I'm really good at that, by the way.
Yeah, so there's a lot to be said when people say ignore the troll. Maybe you can respond eventually if there's a point, but not right away, not before you bring yourself out of fight or flight, because you're going to say something you regret.
Well, and it's pretty interesting too, because even on like a professional community like LinkedIn, it amazes me people who they have their title, they have everything professionally is there right there about them, and yet they still feel compelled to be so harsh in their opinion. Right. And in the sense of not like throwing tactfulness out the window. And what I've noticed is people they won't engage on their platform, and they won't provide their own valuable insight because they're fearful of that one person saying that thing.
Yeah. Did you know that tact is an inherited personality trait?
No. Yeah. That's awesome.
So people are born with, of course, their natural temperament, and about 60% of your personality is what we call your genotype. It's basically what you were born with. And then you have about 40% that's shaped by the environment. They call that the phenotype. And so we inherit, it is called tact in the Big Five personality. If you're familiar with the Big Five personality assessment, there are 28 subtraits, and tact is one of them, and so is reserve. And people who have high reserve don't speak up, and people who have low reserve always share their opinion. So when you combine someone with low tact and low reserve, those people are naturally oriented to speak whatever's on their mind, and they're very blunt and direct in their delivery. And so since they're naturally wired that way, that to them is a sensible style of communication. And they think that putting tact around things is a waste of time. It's flowery. They believe they're truth telling, and that they are doing people a favor by being direct and no nonsense. So it's really not effective to say, you're rude, or this is a professional platform, because they're like, I am being professional by telling you the truth. And so sometimes when you're dealing with people who are overly blunt and direct like that, really the only thing that you can do is say, give feedback in a way that's not critical, right? So I appreciate the feedback that you're giving me. It is coming across a little bit direct, and people with different personalities may not hear what you have to say, and you have some good feedback, so you might consider tailoring your delivery to your audience. So that's about all you can do. And blunt people are going to remain blunt. That's the only way they know how to communicate. You can become more tactful, but what's in it for me? If somebody hasn't seen a fallout from that, and if they're not getting fired from jobs, or it's not having any kind of a negative reaction, behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. So they have to see some sort of a downside other than, oh, your hurt feelings on the internet.
And it's so interesting. I love what you're saying, because I'm even processing this for like owners and managers who they kind of wear their brashness as like a badge of honor. And that, like, I love how you expressed it too, of like, well, yeah, I told them the truth. I mean, how could I, would you really want me not to say it? And it feels like people sometimes they miss that tactfulness component in the sense of, yes, you gave the truth, but you also like crushed this person. And now they can't digest what was actually really good feedback, but your mode of delivery kept them from actually, eating the meat and spitting out the bones. And it feels like it all comes back to this conversation of like self-awareness and realizing, oh, this is my natural mode of communication, but it's not working for this person. And if someone doesn't have that revelation of self-awareness, they kind of always continue to operate in this, well, yeah, that's what's natural to me. So what's your philosophy on self-awareness? How does someone maybe make that click, or that, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm a horrible person, or I'm it's not working, or people hate me, or how does that happen for someone?
Oh, Blake, I could talk for days about this, so I'll try to gather my thoughts and be succinct. But self-awareness, first of all, is the number one predictor of career success. If you look at research on being successful in your career, self-awareness is the thing to spend the most time on. Yeah. And so what people don't realize is there are no good or bad personalities. There are only good or bad behaviors. And so it's very helpful to understand your personality and other people's personalities and what the priorities and motivations are from different personalities. So for example, the blunt and direct people, they prioritize challenging themselves and other people. They think that's important. That's how we get better. That's how we get results. That's how we take action. But somebody who's a more harmonious person who likes to get along with people and doesn't like conflict, they prioritize and need supportive behavior. They prioritize being a supportive person and creating stability in relationships. And so what's happening is we're crossing wires, and this person is saying, hey, like, this is the impact you're having on me, boss, as you come and delegate to me, or what have you. And the other person discounts the feedback because they're not recognizing that people have fundamentally different priorities and different needs and motivations based on how they're wired. And so you're only going to be able to be effective with about 25% of the population who are wired like you. And so the question becomes, are you satisfied with having effective relationships with 25% of the population and ineffective relationships with 75% of the population? And if you say, yes, I'm okay with that, then you need to do a little bit of a gut check on what are your goals in life, because you can't be successful by yourself, because those things are going to catch up with you. So self-awareness is a predictor of career success because we don't accomplish anything alone. Even though I work for myself, I have two people that I've hired to work with me, so I don't work alone, but I'm fairly alone. I work from my house. I don't accomplish things alone. I have customers, I have partners, coaches that I certify. I can't advance the work I'm doing by myself. And so when someone says, well, you're too sensitive, or nobody else has given me this feedback before, they kind of reject the feedback about how they're presenting in the world. You really have to say, well, be that as it may, if you don't agree with that feedback, this is the perception people have. So how do you want to manage that? Because you have to manage the perceptions people have, whether or not you agree with their opinions or their feedback. So self-awareness is huge for a lot of reasons, not just relationships, and communication and emotional intelligence is one of the number one things that people complain about when they talk to me about their boss, for example, lack of it. But you need self-awareness to even know who you are, to know where you fit in the world. So what should I be doing with my life? How should I be spending my time? What are my priorities? What's important to me? Who should I be spending time with? What are the types of endeavors that I should be investing in and careers that I should pursue? If you don't know who you are, it's not just the relationship impact of not being able to have effective relationships with people, but you'll put your career ladder on the wrong wall. And not just your career ladder, really your entire life won't line up to who you're meant to be.
Well, and oh my gosh, everything you just said was just phenomenal. And I have like 5 different topics I want to go on now, but I think the immediate one I want to ask you is that last bit that you just said. It's really interesting how I talk to people who they can't answer two questions about themselves: what they're passionate about, or who they are as a person.
Love Monday.
And how do I fit in the world? Like, what, I loved your expression of what do I put my ladder on? And and it's interesting to me how people, it's like that internal why of and not to sound like cliche of like my purpose in life, but that's kind of what it is. It's who am I and how do I fit? And it's, you can take the self-awareness conversation on one end of that person's really abrasive or hard to work with or whatever, but even on like the core of identity, it feels like there's a group of people out there who they just don't know the answer to those questions. They don't know, and I guess this is like, enter in YouMap, but it's just interesting to me, especially people in their 20s and 30s who still aren't really clear.
Oh, I mean, and you shouldn't feel bad about that, because the saying that I always say is it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. You're too close to yourself to be objective. And given the fact that you were born with your talents, you tend to take them for granted as well. You don't really see them as strengths because they come easy to you. And we don't tend to value easy. If something's easy, it can't be worth much. And that's true in most cases. Anything that's worth something is never easy. Marriage isn't easy. Raising children isn't easy. Rising in your career isn't easy. Learning to play an instrument isn't easy. And being a professional athlete, anything that you're pursuing, an endeavor that you're pursuing, especially when you add people into the mix, is difficult. And so we can't accept that the gift of our strengths is easy for us to use. They can't be worth much. They can't have value. And that's just really the farthest thing from the truth. But you shouldn't feel bad about it, because Benjamin Franklin once said that the three hardest things are steel, diamond, and to know oneself. And Ben Franklin was a really smart guy, and a very accomplished guy. And he was saying back in the 1700s. So like, if he thinks that's difficult, I mean, who am I, right? I didn't even invent the post office. But the point of all of that is to say, it's normal to not know who you are. That's the beauty of life, is pursuing that question of who am I, and really knowing your values is the easiest access point to answer that question. But who encourages you to do that? When you're in school, or your family, or your employer, no one asks you what's most important to you. They say, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's the number one question that kids get asked. Why aren't we asking them questions about who they are first, not about where do you want to stick yourself in the puzzle of the world, but what's your puzzle piece and what fits you? We need to start asking kids questions about what do you care about, or what makes you happy, or what are the types of things that you do that just delight you, not what job do you want to have someday. They can't answer that question. 40-year-olds can't answer that half the time.
Well, and I think it's what leads to like the midlife crisis, is you attached yourself to the what, and then the what didn't fulfill you. And it's like, well, I never really asked myself what made me happy, or what my natural giftings were. And I love how you articulated that too, of like, yeah, I think you're so right in that we have it backwards. And, when we understand our why of who we are as a person and what we want to do in life, the what really doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't. It's just the mode of how we fulfill the why. But if we never figure out the why, then I guess we're always kind of seeking and searching for that meaning, right?
Yeah, we look for what, and then, oh, that's not working. So what's the next what, and what's the next what? And we're just like whatting our way through life.
Well, and it's part of the reason why millennials change jobs so often, is because I think millennials are so in tune with that why, and being, and especially recognizing when they're unfulfilled. Yeah. And I think it was even LinkedIn that had some sort of survey that talked about millennials will change jobs 7 times in 12 years, which just seems astronomical. But it's because, well, this exactly what you just said. This what didn't work. Well, this what didn't work, and so I'm constantly seeking for, again, that fulfillment.
Well, I think also is, we have moved from survival. When you look back in generations, people were trying to survive. It was very common for people to work 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. You had Sunday off, you went to church and spent time with your family, and that was life. And there was so much time spent on surviving and getting by, that as our life has gotten easier, we have more time to go inward and reflect and think about things more than just putting food on the table or keeping the lights on or what have you. And so there are good and bad of that. Like we have people navel gazing and coming out with like some outrageous things in our culture right now, like this outrage culture of if I don't know who, like people going crazy over like Bo Derek braiding her hair in that movie she was in, 10 or whatever. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is what we're worrying about. But because we have more time on our hands and life is easier, we can start worrying about like minutia. But the good side of that is we've become more self-reflective because we have a little bit more space to do that. Unless you're on your cell phone all the time and you have no personal white space. But honestly, I did read an article by Gallup that said exactly what you're saying. Gallup did a poll and they found out that millennials are far more values driven than previous generations.
Wow. Well, and I love, and I think maybe, I feel like you put something out on LinkedIn recently about values. It's something that's been really big for my own business of helping people understand their values. Can I ask you what some of your values are?
Yes. My number one value is love and connection with other people. My number 2 value is making a difference in people's lives. My number 3 value is autonomy. And my number 4 value is having fun.
So how do some of those values, what does that look like exemplified in like your day to day?
So I limit the travel I do for speaking, especially international travel. I'll only do 1 international trip per year and 1 out of town speaking trip per quarter, because I get out of sorts if I'm not connected to my family. And so I don't say yes to a whole lot of travel. And in fact, I have more travel this summer than I would like, but they're short trips, overnight trips. But extended trips, like more than 3 days, I will only do 1 a quarter usually. I have actually 2 next quarter, but that just, that's another story. So love and connection. Autonomy, I'm very careful when I collaborate because I like people. Don't get me wrong. I love people and I love helping people. But at this point in my life, I don't like the millions of brainstorming meetings where we're trying to come up with consensus in a direction. And because I have a very clear vision of what I'm trying to accomplish. So sometimes collaboration it's not that it slows me down. It's just that I know what I'm trying to accomplish. And in order to collaborate with other people, we have to really be on the same page. So I'm very careful on who I collaborate with and that we are on the same page. We have the same goals. And for fun, I laugh like 500 times a day.
What is, I want to back up. What is your purpose? What's your vision? What are you trying to do?
I'm trying to help people love Monday. It drives me. 2 things just drive me. I hate that people are born, live, and die, never unwrapping the unique gifts that they have to contribute to the world. That makes me crazy because everyone is a 1 in infinity person. Because only 1 in 33 million people have the same top 5 strengths finder results. And if you layer in people's context, their experiences, their own values, what they're good at, their personality, what their passions are, there's no one that has ever lived before or after you that's like you. And so it makes me nuts that the world was deprived of what you had to offer. And the second thing that drives me crazy is that people settle. They go into some situation that they hate. They're not using their strengths. It doesn't align to their values. It demotivates them. Their health is affected. And they think that's all there is, that there's no other choice. Just those 2 things, not giving your gifts to the world and settling. I can't even tell you, like I lose sleep over this sometimes, like thinking about it if I dwell on it too much.
And why does it feel like, this is my own bias, but it feels like people are very good at recognizing when they're in, I don't know the word, I guess, disharmony with certain circumstances, and they know they're settling, and yet they are very passive on changing those. Like a good example would be a friend of mine who he absolutely hates his job, hates it, hates his boss, hates his industry. He finds no fulfillment in it. And I was like, what are you going to do about it? And he's like, well, I guess I'll work there for another 5 years. And I just I just thought
I'm ready to drive to his house and shake him silly. Well, honestly, let me tell you, Blake, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I cracked the puzzle in my own life. I was working in these jobs and on paper I looked very successful. I was making six figures, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Like, people say, I can't not do this because of the money. But when you actually look where the rubber meets the road, that's not what makes people happy. It's not what they care about. You can take, if you're making six figures, you can take a $15,000 pay cut and figure out how to not be homeless. I promise you. You know, you can figure it out. Stop going to Starbucks. Don't spend $500 on your kid's birthday party. Like, you can figure it out.
Yeah.
And I get so like worked up over this. I'm sorry, but
no, that 1-year-old birthday party is really important. Since they won't remember it.
but yeah, I mean, I was doing that. I was telling myself, oh, I can't quit this job because I won't make as much money. And it's like hilarious, because when you pursue what you're really good at and you're really passionate about, people get drawn to you. They're like, whoa, you are in the zone with what you're doing. They see it. I don't care if you are a book editor, if you are a video creator of content, video content. If you're good at something, you get people's attention, and then people are drawn to you, whether that's an employer or whether it's a customer. And I find it hilarious that I was afraid to quit my job because I wouldn't make as much money. I don't like to talk about my salary specifically, but let's just say I'm doing better than the job I was afraid to leave, because I'm walking in my purpose.
And that's powerful.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe we can unpack that story a little bit, because a lot of times people are very good at, there's often this gap in the storytelling where someone will say, you know, you see where someone is today and they're this really awe-inspiring figure, and, you know, all the credentials are there, you know, even for yourself, you know, career consultant, #1 book on Amazon, all these different things that are incredibly impressive about you. And then people will also tell the story of like the circumstances before, of like, oh, I was so unhappy, I was doing this, but there's often like this gap there. And I'd love to hear kind of your entrepreneurial journey, because I think that's really powerful to some people, of how did you go from, you take the leap, you know, you quit the job, to now being successful as you are. And obviously there's, you know, I'm sure you're hungry for even more success, but what happened in that gap? How did you get to where you are today?
So first of all, I was planful. I didn't just walk in and say, take this job and shove it. And then, woo, wing and a prayer. Let's hope this works. So I'm married to a very conscientious and methodical and deliberative man. He is a software architect, information security architect. So he's by nature a conscientious and cautious person. So I knew that I couldn't just go doing something crazy and spontaneous and not give him like a total aneurysm. So I had to kind of lay out a plan. I was more planful to be respectful of him. So I started to save money. And I saved 6 months of my expenses. He pays some of the bills, I pay some of the bills. And so I saved 6 months of expenses, and I started a side hustle. So I started to talk to people who started businesses. What are the things I need to think about? What are the basic things I need to do to get up and running? Because the biggest mistake I see people make is they think they have to have everything right out of the box, and then they exhaust all their funds on the fancy website and all of those things. So I figured out what are the bare bone things that I must have to operate so I can get up and running. And I went and did all those things, and I got support where I needed help. People who knew what they were doing and I didn't know, I asked them for help. I bartered and traded services to get what I needed when I didn't have the funds. There were lots of people who would be interested in getting assessments or having a coaching session with me. And then in return, can you help me figure out the messaging for my website? Things like that. So I got everything I needed, and I started doing clients at night because I was working during the day, which worked out great because most of the people I worked with had a job and they wanted to talk to me at night anyway. Well, I got to the point where I was working 80 hours a week because I was working my day job and I was working my night job, and it was getting too stressful. So I decided to to quit my day job at that point when I had 6 months of expenses saved and I couldn't sustain working both jobs anymore and something had to give. So I put in my notice, quit my day job, and pitched the idea of a contract with my current employer to do consulting work with them. And I ended up getting a $25,000 contract to do coaching with the company and did that for 3 years. So that really was nice seed money to help me as my business grew. But I'm not going to lie, I made $48,000 my first year with a $25,000 contract with my company. So I needed those 6 months of expenses and I had to keep hustling. So basically, if you're not passionate about your entrepreneurial venture, you're not going to be the ambassador that you need to be to grow your company. I am not a natural salesy person, but I'm passionate about what I do. So I can talk to anybody about it and not come across like I'm trying to sell them anything, because I'm not. I care about people's Monday joy. I want them to have that good feeling when they go to the job, not that dread in the pit of their stomach. And I care so much about that. And so I care about you as a person when I talk to you about that. So anywhere I went, I would ask people, what do you do for work and do you love it? What do you love about it? What do you wish were better? What, better or more of? What would you change? If you could wave a magic wand, what would be different? Well, what might you do to make that happen? And I would just sort of coach people everywhere I went. And that's what got people thinking about me when someone they knew, I met this woman at this thing for my kids' school. She was there too. And I think she could help you. And so I created other ambassadors talking about what I was doing because I was so passionate about it and really believed in it. So if you just say, I think I'd like to do whatever I'm doing at work that I don't really like for myself, so I don't have this boss I don't really like, and you're no more passionate about it, your business may struggle, because if you don't really believe in what you're doing, you're not going to be able to really create that traction you need to get it off the ground.
Well, and how many years ago, what was the first year that the 48 grand? When you quit your job, you started your business, like full time doing your business. What year was that?
Yeah. So I set up the business in 2013 and then didn't really do anything with it. And then at the end of 2014, I took my first client.
Yeah.
And that was in November. And I quit my job 7 months later in June of 2000. Is that 7 months? June of 2015. So that 2015 year was the $48,000 year. And then the next year I matched my salary from my other job.
Well, what's really funny about your story is I talk to people who are so out of touch with the actual entrepreneurial journey. And there's some very good marketers out there too, who will convince you that you can go to, from 0 to 7 figures in 6 months. But listening to you and seeing,
ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And I think what's frustrating for me, since I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, is the naivety of someone not realizing how much, and I loved what you talked about of putting a plan in place and being very strategic about it, but especially the timing of it all, and that it took years to really grow this thing into something that,
it takes 2 years to really get the flow of clients where you don't wonder, am I going to starve? It takes 2 years. It really does. And I already had experience with what I was doing. I was doing career coaching for 6 years already in volunteer work, and I got certified in 2007 as a career coach in my company. So I had a butt ton of experience. I had coached hundreds and hundreds of people before I started my business. So I was coming in with expertise already. And so what happens is people will start a business and they'll put a couple posts on LinkedIn and they'll say, what's going on here? I'm not getting any business. And I'm like, this is a farmer's game. You don't go out there and plant tomato seeds and go out the next morning and put your hands on your hip and say, where the hell are all the tomatoes? You are out there planting and watering and planting and watering and weeding and watering and hoeing and raking and doing all of those things. And months later, here comes a little green shoot. And you have to keep nurturing it because it'll wither and die if you don't. So you are out there like a farmer, and it's so reap, not so reap.
Yeah. Or, what's the hack to reap tomorrow when like I guess honestly, it's how do you get rich quick and
No,
understanding they do not
entrepreneurship
exist.
is not a microwave meal. It's a crock pot meal.
I love that. And if I can push you on your authenticity a little bit, do you remember in your journey, your lowest point?
I had $5 in my checking account, and I was sitting on my bed looking at my laptop going, I have my son's tuition coming out of my bank account in 2 days. I have $5, and I took the money out of his savings account to pay for it. And that was my low point. I'm stealing from my son's savings account.
I hope he never watches this one day.
What's that?
I hope he never watches this one day.
Well, I put it back and then some. Yeah. So he doesn't know. I mean, that was money I had put in.
Right. No, I'm just kidding.
But still, no, I literally borrowed money from 3 of my children's savings account to piece together my son's tuition. Well, and I felt like a terrible mother.
Well, and it's so important to be, I love what you said about being passionate about your work, because it feels like in those low points, and I don't even mean like, I'm having a bad day. I mean like low points, like despair. Like, what am I doing? I'm ruining my family. What have I done? It feels like if that passion isn't there, if that deep drive to make an impact with what you're doing isn't there, you're not going to make it long term. You're not going to survive through those.
You will quit on yourself faster than other people quit on you, for sure, if you don't believe in what you're doing. And that's why I say to people, like, you have to have that self-awareness to know, does what you're trying to do even line up with who you are? Are you even suited for this? And it really drives me crazy when people are out there trying to talk everyone into becoming an entrepreneur. When they say, anyone can be an entrepreneur, anyone can work for themselves. That is the biggest load of garbage that is being pushed out there right now. And I've had, I don't really debate people, but I've had debates on this one because it's dangerous pushing people into that sort of thing. There are people whose number one value is security. Do you think that a person who the number one thing that's the most important thing in the world to them being security isn't going to have a total nervous breakdown being an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Right.
It doesn't fit some people's values. There are people that I have literally met who have said, the more routine my life is, the better. I love routine work, and I want to get a job for a company, work there for 30 years, do the same routine every day, and that will make me happy. And I'm withering inside hearing that even spoken, because I'm not wired that way. But you have to respect that people are very different. They have different strengths and abilities. They have different values. And so when people are out there peddling this one-size-fits-all advice, you need to go and do this and you need to go and do that, I'm like, I don't think so. You're not thinking about how people are wired, and your advice is working up some people and getting them all fired up because they want that. But that doesn't resonate with a lot of people.
Well, and I think it's about having I don't know the wording for it, but it's like having a strong conscience on your influence, in the sense of, as you're encouraging people, in the back of your mind, recognizing that it doesn't work for everybody. And I know some people who they've gone on to be in financial ruin because they were pushed, yeah, you can do it, and they weren't suited for it. And when you challenge the person who encouraged them, they're like, well, that's their fault that it didn't work. And it's like, no, like you really like push them into this. And so it feels like and I don't know if it's your conscience, I don't know what it is, but there's a line somewhere where it's like, you're being mindful of your influence. It's where influence people to do what. And I'm just now formulating this in my head, so I don't even really know what I mean beyond.
I know exactly what you're saying. There is some advice that does apply to everyone. Like, everyone should endeavor to know who they are. Everyone should know what's most important to them. So I don't feel bad peddling that message to know what your values are so you can align your life to them, because every human being that applies to. But to be out there pushing the message that every person that walks the planet should be a vegan or a Buddhist, or you know what I mean? That's when it gets dicey, when you're putting your values-based ideals onto other people.
You're so right. Yeah. Well, and it feels like this is a great segue, I think, into YouMap in that, you're helping people discover things about themselves. I'm really curious about how you got to the point of creating YouMap into what it is today. And I'd love for you maybe to give a little bit of explanation as to what it is to our listeners. But, just to preface this, it feels like, and when I did corporate consulting, I could talk about any topic and you'd have people who'd be like moderately engaged, some people not engaged. But anytime I talked about personality, the room would light up. It'd be like, oh my gosh, I really want to know about who I am. Mm-hmm. And so you've obviously engaged in a niche that has a lot of excitement around it. But I just can't get over how titanic a task it was I'm sure when you started creating this thing, like, I'm going to create this personality assessment and it's going to be great. And walk me through that. Like, what is it? How did you make it? Let's unpack it a little bit.
So I'm what I call the accidental entrepreneur. I was just looking, I distinguish between a business owner and an entrepreneur. So I have a product and I am an entrepreneur. I don't really consider somebody who decides to become a consultant for themselves. I don't really call that person an entrepreneur. I know that that's broadly used for people who work for themselves. And I'm not saying you have to have a product per se, but I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur when I was a coach and I was coaching people, and that was that. I think I became an entrepreneur when I created YouMap, but I didn't create it on purpose. I created it out of a need. So first of all, I knew I wanted to coach people, and I started testing different instruments and tools and processes. And I started to have a lot of problems with clients losing things, not knowing which document I was referencing, because I would put them through these different assessments that were out there already. And my client could potentially have 7 files, the 3 files that came with this assessment and the 2 that came with that one and 2 with that one. And so I'd go to debrief them or have a session and I'd say, okay, we need this particular document from this assessment. And they'd say, oh, is it the one that says, this on top? No, that's your strengths assessment. I'm looking for the DISC work of leaders. No, not DISC workplace, work of leaders. That's the big 5. We're looking, and it was like this who's on first routine with my clients, just trying to figure out which tools. Oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to do that assessment. I did the values. We're talking about personality today. And it was just it was really challenging for some of my clients to do the right assessment for the right session and have the right file, and then they would lose all their files. I can't find this document anymore. Do you know where this one is? I only have this one. You get the idea. And I thought, this is crazy. I can't do this. So I created a Word document, and I started putting the summary of the results into one file. And I would put the headline, here's your information about your strengths. And over time, I figured out what tools really got down to what the person needed to know. I stopped using tools that I was like, they're paying for this, but it's kind of fluff. What I tried to do was get down to what were the fewest things I need to know about a person to get a holistic picture of kind of who they were and how they show up in the world from a career perspective. And as I talked to people, I would listen to what they would say, and I started taking notes. I started to take notes on every person that called me in the prospective client call, the first consult. I would take notes on what they would tell me of why they were unhappy in their career. And I started to create theme categories, and everything kept falling onto these 4 buckets, nothing else. And so I started to call it the 4 pillars of career satisfaction. So that's what came first. And then I would have this Word document, and I'm like, okay, I need to know what someone's natural talents are. We need to know that. Their strengths. I need to know their values, because I would have people that would go into jobs that fit them perfectly, and it would be a train wreck. And it was because there was a values violation with their manager or the culture or even the job itself. So we needed to know their values and their talents, and we needed to know the skills they enjoyed using, because they might be doing something that burned them out, for example. And so 18 months in, they're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to have to go out on stress leave. And then their personality always needs to be taken into account. So those were the 4 pillars. And so I had it in this document, and I thought, I kept pasting from other people's assessments. And I thought, well, I'm going to create some of my own. So I created my own values exercise. I created my own skills assessment. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to give people this stuff in this Word document, I might as well make it look nice. So I hired Crystal Davis, used to work with me at my old company, and she worked on the graphics team, and she has all of these, PowerPoint and document presentations, annual reports. She would do them for the executives. So she's really great with graphic design. And she created YouMap, and that human figure that you see on the YouMap profile. So then I thought, well, now it looks professional because I'm a maximizer and I like things to be good. So then I had this, and then I said to my husband, well, we might as well automate this so that people can take the assessments online and it goes into the document itself, because I was copying and pasting data in there. I just kept maximizing it. And then coaches started to see it and recruiters started to see it. Where did you get this thing? Well, I made it. What? I'm like, well, it's not as impressive as it sounds, because it was quite an evolution to get to that point. It's not like I woke up inspired and like, I'm going to build this amazing automated. It didn't come to be quite like that. And so then people started calling me and saying, how did you know which assessments to choose? Well, I created them. How did you know to create those? Well, I talked to about 2,000 people and I listened to their stories and I broke out what the core things were that people needed to think about for their career to fulfill them. It came from other people's information to me. I didn't pick what do I think people should know about themselves. They told me. And so then I thought, well, all these coaches are wanting to know about this. I better figure out a way so that they can use it too. Well, I can't just give it to people and have them be like a total hack and not know how to debrief people. I might as well create a certification. And so everything just kind of evolved into what it is today, just accidentally by need.
Well, and I love your story of how the process of iteration, and again, it's so countercultural to the entrepreneurial, like, sexy dream of like, you build it as it is and it's amazing, but understanding how you iterated it over time to become this amazing thing it is today. I think that's very real.
Yeah. And I will tell you, my husband gets the props for that. My husband is the senior software consultant at Microsoft. And my husband wouldn't let me automate it at first. He said, no. He said, you can't do that. He said, that's what bankrupts entrepreneurs. They build the technology before they have the demand. He said, you do things manually as long as you can until the demand makes it so that there's no ROI in doing it that way anymore. And I thought that was dumb. I was like, that's dumb. Like, why would I do things manually? And he was right. So once people started to buy things and pay for things, that stream of revenue is what started paying for the automation instead of me bankrupting my savings to pay for the automation up front. And what I thought was ridiculous advice, I then shared with other entrepreneurs, like people like Bob Sager, who's been an entrepreneur for like 30 something years. He said, that was brilliant advice your husband gave you. And if I didn't respect my husband so much, I would have blown it off and just done what I wanted to do anyway. But I would say that piece of advice alone financially saved my business.
Wow. Spouses are so frustrating in that way. And my wife will say, you should do this. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then I end up doing it, 6 months later. I'm like, that was a great idea. Why didn't I? He's like, I know. So, well, I love the story. And there's something specific about YouMap I want to ask you about. Krista Molion on LinkedIn had tagged you yesterday and said that there's a big emotional intelligence piece to your YouMap assessment. And I'd love to hear more about that. Some of our listeners might not even be fully aware of what even EQ is or what emotional intelligence is. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so I love Justin Barisso's definition. He's the author of EQ Applied, which is a really great book. He's a contributor to Inc.com. And Justin Barisso defined it as, he's done a ton of EQ research, but making your emotions work for you instead of against you. It's the simplest definition, but it's really quite true. And you can actually use those for evil as well as for good. A lot of people have this kind of halo effect over EQ, but you can be emotionally intelligent and use it in a manipulative way, which I pushed back against when he first said that, but he won me over after reading his book. But all that to say, there are different traits that contribute to being more emotionally intelligent. They are, like we would say, a soft skill because we're talking about emotions. And some people will write off emotions and say emotions don't matter. But I'm a logical person. I have 4 of 5 of my themes are thinking strengths. So I am a thinker, but I believe in the importance of emotion from a brain-based perspective. I have a degree in neuroscience, and I also am a master certified trainer in brain-based coaching. And so I've studied the brain a lot. And in my studies, I learned that when people's area of the brain gets damaged that are responsible for emotion, they can no longer make decisions. So a decision like, where do you want to go for dinner? Someone who has that brain damage can't tell you. They'll talk for an hour about the pros and cons, but they can't then move into the emotion part and actually make the decision. So people who say emotions don't matter, logic is all that's important, the brain science says that's actually incorrect. So all that to say, there are certain people who are going to be wired naturally to be somewhat more emotionally intelligent than other people, but that doesn't mean that everyone can't learn it. The difficulty with emotional intelligence is it's not something that you learn in a textbook or in a classroom. Because you're talking about emotions, you have to experience those emotions and then make decisions on how to react to those emotions in actual situations, like an employee that's challenging you or a boss that is criticizing you in a meeting. I mean, those responses, you have to be in those situations and practice your reactions to actually build those muscles. It's not something you're going to learn in a class. And that's why it's so hard to learn. So the YouMap will give you a foundation to understand, is my personality tendency one that I listen or one that I want to do all the talking? Is my personality such that I can understand or put myself into another person's shoes? Or do I tend to only consider my own feelings in this situation? So you will see, according to someone's natural talents and personality, how they tend to be oriented, that lens. Like there's a correlation with emotional intelligence, but there's not a specific emotional intelligence section in the YouMap. You can just see what someone's potential challenges are. For example, you will see if all the interpersonal skills are burnout for someone. Chances are they're going to struggle with some of the emotional intelligence issues in the workplace if they have no skills really preferred in interpersonal skills.
Well, and it feels like we have a lot of work to do and this is a personal soapbox of mine, we have a lot of work to do to really push the conversation forward, and that there are some companies that are very open to this conversation of EQ and let's train our managers, let's train our people. But then it feels like the majority is still, and I don't know if it's really what it is, but when you start talking about it, it is kind of like this, oh, that's fluffy. Oh, that's emotions don't impact revenue. And they fail to see the connection between someone's EQ and then their ability to collaborate or to have a positive, productive culture. And so they are incapable of actually recognizing, no, actually you're killing your revenue, or you're putting out a really crappy product because people don't like working here. They're not really, and it all comes back to this conversation of EQ, but it feels like it's hard to get that in the public limelight outside of well-known influencers like Gary Vee, who it's kind of been his thing, especially in the last 6 months. You know, how do we push that conversation forward?
Well, I think you have to make it relate to people with what's in it for me. You always have to deal with the what's in it for me, and you have to help people understand how it's going to help them. And to know that, you have to know what motivates people. So dominance-driven people who are task-oriented are going to be motivated by getting results. And so how can you demonstrate that investing time in their emotional intelligence and the development of that is going to get them better results? So people who are interested, more conscientious people are interested in stability and quality. And how are people going to be more likely to give you the quality result that you need, that you're working with? Or how are you going to create a more stable work environment if people are working together effectively? So you have to look to what people prioritize, what their needs and motivations are, and speak to those. And every person is different. So to just throw a blanket of, oh, you'll get along better with people. Some people don't prioritize getting along with people, but they do prioritize getting results. So it's really, the messaging needs to be tailored to the different temperaments of people and what they value. And I would say also using analogy is helpful for people to see connections. So when people say, oh, emotions don't matter and all this fluffy stuff, do you think a lack of logic is why the divorce rate is so high? Because there was a lack of logic? No, I mean, it was emotions and things like that caused divorce and people to separate. So you can look to other areas of your life and realize that's the case. It wasn't a skill problem. Oh, I didn't like the way my wife unloaded the dishwasher, so I divorced her. That's not what's going on here. So I think that it's really like helping people understand how it will benefit them based on how they're wired. And really, you don't have to come up with like 7 billion combinations of that messaging. There's really only the 4 core temperaments that you have to deal with. And then helping people understand parallels where they can see other areas of life where it can benefit them and what the problems result when they don't have those skills.
Well, answering that question, what's in it for me, is, I think you're so right. It's so crucial. And I think sometimes maybe it's not fair to say like we expect too much of people. It's just that people can't latch on to something if they don't see how it impacts them. And I remember I was doing like a leadership training program to this Fortune in our area. And the HR manager kept saying, Blake, you don't have the component of what's in it for me. And I was like, well, they should just want to be better leaders. They should just want to be, why would I need to do that? And I think at the time I realized now it was just naivety of just expecting people to latch on to something where if they can't draw that connection, it's not selfish, but people have to understand this is why this is important for me, for them to really connect with it.
Yeah. And I think that hiring really needs to take EQ into consideration. If you want to have an organizational culture of emotionally intelligent employees, you need to hire emotionally intelligent leaders and not just look at their experience and skills and results. And I think we are so bottom line focused, that financial bottom line focused in a lot of organizations, that they don't investigate the emotional intelligence through the hiring process.
Well, I talked to a guy who he just became this new like branch manager. And I said, well, tell me about yourself. And he said, well, I've had 25 years in the industry. And I just thought that really means nothing to me. I guess for some people, it's a really great qualifier. Like, oh, no, wow.
It could be 1 year done 25 times.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I think you're right that we latch on to those bottom line metrics sometimes instead of really seeing who is this person and how are their values going to facilitate how the team operates.
Yeah, one of the things that I coach job seekers to ask a new manager is, can you tell me how you contributed to a team member's success or growth in the past 6 months? And if that person looks at you like with a deer in a headlight look, they don't even know what you're talking about. So they've got the door closed, head down, working. So many managers move into a role and function as an individual contributor with a manager title. And it's really hard to find good leaders because we're not wired to be leaders. A lot of times people forget that. Gallup has said that if you look at managers, only 1 in 10 people are wired naturally to manage people well, which means 9 out of 10 of us, myself included, had to learn how to be a good manager. It's not something that just spontaneously happens when you get the title. And what's worse is 2/3 of people who find themselves in a manager role have had no training whatsoever.
Which doesn't really, I think you're right, but it doesn't really make sense. It's like, why would you put someone in a management role, but then not actually then train them and develop them? And it's amazing how simple that concept is. Obviously it makes sense, but yet a lot of owners or C-suite people, they don't facilitate that training.
No, and I think because they rewarded that strong performance as an individual contributor, but being a manager of people is a completely different skill set than what they were doing as an individual contributor. And that's really what explains the Peter Principle, that people rise to their level of incompetence. That's really what happens because they're rewarded for their behavior in the role they were performing before and not evaluated for their potential for success in the role that you're putting them into.
Well, and it makes me think of a salesperson I knew who he became the manager of the sales team because he was the number one salesperson. The only problem was he was a really awful boss, and he ended up getting fired.
Well, when you think about what are the qualities that make a person a really good salesperson, they're usually really, really competitive. They're usually extremely autonomous and work really well independently. And they're extremely numbers focused and measurement focused and goal oriented. It's not that they're the top salesperson because they love to sit and listen to your problems and help you come up with solutions. Usually not.
Yeah. Well, something else I want to ask you about, especially just seeing you in the full swing of things and obviously getting a lot of success with your business. You put out a video, and I think this might be the first thing that really made me click to your content was you put out a video. It might have been maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, but I really admired your authenticity in the video, but also it got me thinking. You put out a video that talked about your daughter.
I knew you were going to talk about the time I cried in the car. I just knew it.
I thought, wow, this is someone who is comfortable enough to be honest on the journey.
Oh, I was not comfortable posting that video. Let's be very clear.
Comfortable enough to post it.
Comfortable enough that I hit post, but yeah.
It was very, I don't have any kids. I have a dog. So, but I found myself really admiring it. And I thought, man, I don't even have kids. And I just really, it was very vulnerable of you. It was really admirable of you. But again, since we're kind of unpacking these things that aren't very sexy about entrepreneurship, you've obviously figured out how challenging it is to balance. And I don't even really want to go the route of like, let's talk work-life balance, but, really navigating the cost of success and the cost of impact and the cost of living out your values. I'd love if you could maybe share a little bit more about that or kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So just for your listeners, what happened was my 5-year-old daughter came to me and she was asking me to do something, and I was under the gun for a deliverable, and I told her I couldn't do it, whatever it was. And she said, "You never play with me." That's what she said to me, which of course is not accurate. That's hyperbole. We don't always or never do anything.
Sure.
But her words really penetrated me and made me feel really in that moment insufficient as a mom. And so I'm like, here I am slaying it in the business world, but really dropping the ball as a parent. And so, of course, the first thing you have to do is remember that my daughter's feelings matter, but she is also 5. And so her perspective can be a little skewed because she evaluates really my entire parenting capability on that day on the calendar.
Right.
So I had a conversation with my husband and just really kind of people that I trusted and, before doing that video and really came to the conclusion that what you need to do in your life is really be true to what's important and then do your best to prioritize. So I have since decided that in the summer on Monday and Friday mornings, I'm going to take my kids to the park or do something with them. And so I still might work more hours than I spend with them, but the time that I am spending with them, I'm not looking at my device. I'm not working. I'm spending really good quality time, and they look forward to those Monday mornings and Fridays. And during the work week, I admittedly don't have, I'm there, they're in the room. They can come in and hug me when they feel like it. I'll go and hug them, but I might color with them for a few minutes, but I try to spend time where I can and make it count. But I also recognize that I have been given a mission too. And I think that we as a society focus on me and my own so much. And yes, I'm responsible for my children. I'm not just having them parent themselves. My husband is very involved in their lives, and he reads to them every night, and he puts them to bed while I'm working. So they're getting everything they need. It's not like the TV is babysitting them or anything like that. My husband really picks up my slack there. But my bottom line point is, I am not wired to believe that all that matters is me and mine. And that's okay if someone listening to this does believe that their kids are more important than every other person's kids, or their family is more important than other people in the world. I just happen to not believe that. Just because my kids are genetically related to me, and so I have this bias towards them, I don't think that they deserve better opportunities in life than other people's children. And so I'm getting my message out there. I'm getting the self-awareness that you have gifts and you have value and you can make a much bigger impact in your corner of the world than you realize. And I feel that that message is more important than making my kids feel like they're the center of the world. And I'm unapologetic for that.
Well, there's two things I think about is I love how you're so unapologetically committed to your impact. You know, it's understanding the scope of man, I can really impact so many people. So I have to throw myself fully into that. And the second thing I think about, I don't know if it was Tony Robbins or I don't know who said it, but they talked about how it's quality over quantity. So it's not the number of hours that you're spending with them, but getting that really intentional time. And I love hearing about how you've developed that through time at the park, coloring, or what have you. Because it's I think sometimes we force ourselves to choose. Either I have the family or I have the impact, and maybe that's a limiting belief. Maybe you don't have to choose, right? Like maybe, and it sounds like you've figured that out. You've kind of nailed the system for that.
Well, I think we need to stop being so critical of ourselves too. I mean, we've gotten to the point where it's like, if we're not making our kids the center of our every minute, that we're neglecting them. I mean, that's just simply not the case. My kids are very independent. My daughter is 5 years old and cleans her own room without being asked to, because she's used to having a lot of, we're both here. My husband and I work from home, but she's used to having quite a lot of leeway in how she spends her time. I don't schedule her every minute of her day. And she's a very productive young woman. I suppose she's probably wired that way with her personality, but my kids are turning out just fine. I mean, and I think that women need to stop criticizing each other. I mean, I could sit here and say, well, there are stay-at-home moms and they just sit on Facebook all day. So I'm not here to try and elevate myself by comparing other mothers and the lousy job they're doing. I think we need to support one another. There is too much, well, I can feel better about me because I'm not that person. I think that comparison game really needs to stop.
Well, and I think you're right, but it's so easy because of social media. I mean, you spend 1 second on any platform, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. And the things that you'll think is, wow, that person's a lot happier than me. Wow, that business person's a lot more successful than me. Wow, that person's a lot prettier than me. The list goes on. And in fact, I remember when my wife and I we've been married 5 years, and it has been pretty hard until maybe the last 2 years where it's like, wow, I actually like you. I actually like spending time with you. But I remember especially the first year of marriage, my wife would say something like, well, everyone else's marriage on Facebook, they're just so happy. And I'm like, no one live streams their fight. I mean, no one's putting, that's kind of the temptation. It's kind of what feels natural in that it's kind of hard to actively be mindful enough to reject comparison and say, okay, I'm not going to go down that route.
Well, you know what? I will tell you, Blake, I am just as happy as people think I am. I have a lot of success, but it's not because I just got lucky. I have an abundance mindset. And so I believe there's enough for everyone. Maybe we have different goals and want different things, but so I don't look at other people and say, oh, they're prettier than me. I don't really value attractiveness anyway. I value intellect. So it's like, whatevs, that's great for you. Like I had my hotness when I was 21 and that was fine. Like I'm 40, almost 48 now. That's not a priority anymore. Now I'm worried about making an impact in the world.
Sure.
But my point is, if you allow a scarcity mindset to really set in, that's when you get into this comparison game. And, oh, they got the TED Talk and I didn't, or they got that big contract with that hotel chain and I didn't. That we all have hours coming to us when we work for it and are passionate about it. And there are plenty of opportunities for each one of us. So I would really say stay away from that scarcity mindset because it's poison. And those limiting beliefs are self-imposed and they will limit your success. But because I believe that the sky is the limit for me, I often do reap a lot of opportunities because I think people are attracted to that mentality that I have. You attract what you put out into the world. Even if you're not saying it, your body language, your word choice, your tone, your presentation, it reeks of fear and scarcity if that's what you're operating from.
Well, and how does someone, and I don't want to beat a dead horse because obviously, it takes self-awareness to realize what you're putting out, but how does someone flip it? How do you go from a fear-based?
What's the opposite message of what you're telling yourself? There's an opposite. If I play a game with you and I say, what's the opposite of open? What's the opposite of open?
Closed.
Right. What's the opposite of despair?
Happiness or hope.
Exactly. So whatever those, name what you're doing, name those emotions, name the stories. 60 to 80% of the messages that go through our mind every day are repeated messages. We only have about 20% novel thoughts. Every day is, what am I going to make for dinner? Oh, I'm a terrible mother. Like all these same thoughts that we're having every day. I'm too fat. I need to lose weight. Like over and over and over. It's like you have to arrest those recordings in your mind and flip the script. Flip that script.
Well, I love how aggressive, how much conviction you just had with that. I mean, I feel inspired. I'm like, yeah, I need to flip some things. And I don't know why my mind goes here. I don't know if you remember like the old like Stuart Smalley SNL bit where
oh my gosh,
he's in front of the mirror and he's like, I'm smart and doggone it, people like me. And we kind of need to do that a little bit sometimes, is to
absolutely
like script and speak out what you want to be true about your life and your circumstances.
I have to say though, I come by the ability to look at my positives. It's not to my credit, actually. Maximizer is my number one strength, and people with Maximizer focus on strengths. I focus on other people's strengths, I focus on mine, and I see potential. And so I look at, that can be a blind spot too, right? But I do tend to look at my strengths and what I do well. And so I'm naturally oriented to appreciate the good things about myself. And of course, our messages and our belief and our identity is set by about age 8. And so if we had people in our life who said, you're not going to amount to anything, you're nosy, you're bossy, you're a brat. If we heard all of those messages in our childhood, we're really trying to work against a lot of that. In some cases, it's childhood trauma that people have had, but even just mild verbal abuse, it really shapes those things. And we have to start saying, you know what? Screw you. Get to the back of the bus. Like, that's not true. And I don't have to believe that. And we have to get to a point in our life where we challenge those messages and saying, that doesn't have to be true of me. And maybe it was one day. Maybe I was a terrible person. But every day is a new day to make a decision to pursue being the person that you want to be.
That's empowering. And it makes me think of, my wife had read a book, I think it was called The Battlefield of the Mind. And I don't really know the context of it. I just remember thinking, yeah, like our mind, it's a battlefield, and we really have to be aggressive and active in forcing ourselves to think in a way that's productive for us. And it makes
those thoughts are not benign. Thoughts become things. When you allow those thoughts to have free reign in your head, they manifest into the decisions you make, into the paths you take. And your life can go down a completely different path and trajectory that you don't want to go down. So it's thoughts become things. That is not harmless stuff going on there.
Yeah. Well, it's been just phenomenal having you on the show today. And I know our listeners are just probably blown away. For people who are listening who want to connect with you, how can they get connected with YouMap?
MyUMap.com. It's you as in YOU, not the letter U. MyUMap.com is the website. You can reach me at Kristin, Kristin at MyUMap.com, or Kristin Sherry on LinkedIn. I think there's a couple of them. I'm the one in North Carolina that says author YouMap creator. So I'm at YouMap creator on Twitter and at Career Kristin on Instagram. And then which book do they need to start with? If they're going to go to Amazon today, where do they need to start? YouMap. Uncover your 4 pillars of career satisfaction. How do you spend your day as an entrepreneur? Are you doing things that you shouldn't be doing? Like, who are you and how are you living your life? Start with YouMap. Okay.
Well, for our listeners, thanks so much for listening. And Kristin, we're glad you're on the show. As always, you guys can email me, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. I'd love to hear your feedback, hear what you thought about the episode. Absolutely check out YouMap, check out Kristin on LinkedIn, connect with her. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later. See ya.